The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind that echoes even the sound of a blink. Eliot Hayes sat motionless on the edge of his couch, fingers brushing the soft fur of Rosie, the only soul left who hadn't lied to him. The TV played something meaningless in the background, some comedy with canned laughter that felt like mockery now. It had only been a week since the engagement ring came off, and the silence since then had been louder than any argument they'd ever had. 7 years. That's how long Eliot had built his life around Ryan. 7 years of shared routines, inside jokes, weekend road trips, and whispered promises in the dark. 7 years of believing that forever was real. But forever, it turned out, had an expiration date, and his came without warning. Though, deep down, warning signs had always been there. Ryan used to smile every time his phone lit up. He would tilt it away ever so slightly. When Eliot asked about the girl he kept texting, Ryan just laughed. "She's just a friend," he'd say, brushing it off like lint. The first time Eliot believed him. The second time, he doubted. By the third, his stomach twisted every time the phone vibrated. But still, he stayed. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the belief that people don't just walk away from someone who knows their worst and still chooses to stay. But Ryan did. And not just walk away, he ran. Ran straight into the arms of a younger girl he had met on TikTok. Of all places, they broke up on a Tuesday. Eliot remembered the day not because of the fight, but because of the stillness that followed. Ryan packed a single bag, gave a half-hearted apology, and left with the same ease as someone canceling a subscription. That same night, Ryan posted a photo smiling with the girl, arms wrapped around each other, the caption dripping with a new kind of love that Eliot never got. Rosie curled tighter beside him, as if she could sense the storm beneath his skin. Her loyalty hurt more than Ryan's betrayal. She didn't understand heartbreak. She didn't ask why someone could unlove you overnight. She just stayed. The next few days passed in fragments. Eliot moved like a ghost in his own space, feeding Rosie, answering work emails, pretending to function. But his heart beat with the dull ache of betrayal, and his chest carried a weight that refused to lift. There were no screams, no dramatic finales. Just this Eliot, sitting in a living room filled with memories that now mocked him, holding a jaw who never chose sides, and realizing that forever had left without even locking the door behind it. And yet, there was something beneath all that pain, a sliver, not hope, not yet, but something else, a kind of bitter clarity, the kind that comes when you've been burned and are finally done pretending the fire didn't hurt. Eliot looked down at Rosie and whispered, not to her, but to himself, "We're still here." That meant something. It had to. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something else. Not revenge, not forgiveness, but something far more powerful. If you've ever been left behind and still found the strength to breathe, to rise, to hold your own hand through the dark follow-heart stories, because stories like Eliot's aren't just sad endings, they're the first pages of something braver. Sometimes, the silence after goodbye is the only space where we hear who we truly are. Rosie's paws tapped lightly across the hardwood floor as Eliot opened the front door one final time for Ryan. It had been a few days since the split, and yet this was their first face-to-face exchange since the day Ryan left with only his essentials and a full heart for someone else. He stood in the hallway now, a worn hoodie pulled over his head, eyes avoiding Eliot's. There was no apology, no regret. Just the stale awkwardness between two people who once dreamed about growing old together and were now strangers navigating what pieces to keep. "I'm not here for a fight," Ryan said softly, as if anything he said could still wound Eliot more than silence already had. Eliot nodded wordlessly. He didn't want to fight either. Not anymore. That part of him was already exhausted. I just wanted to talk about Rosie." The word struck Eliot not with anger, but with a strange pang of protectiveness. Rosie had been with them since she was a puppy picked out together from a shelter, cuddled through thunderous nights, sung to with lullabies Eliot made up while cooking. Rosie wasn't just a tum, she was a witness to their love. And now, somehow, a subject of negotiation after its collapse. Eliot crossed his arms, a subtle signal that he was listening, but not yielding. Ryan continued, I know she loves you more, and it's your house. It makes sense she stays here. I don't want to uproot her. Eliot let out a breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But, Ryan added, can you send me photos sometimes of Rosie? Just every now and then I'd like that. It was such a small request, so nonchalant, so reasonable, and yet something in it rubbed Eliot raw. Ryan wanted to walk away from everything and still keep a thread tied to Rosie like a souvenir from a life he no longer lived. Eliot nodded anyway, not because he owed him, but because he couldn't bring himself to sever every string just yet. Yeah, I can do that. The moment passed quickly. Ryan gave Rosie a final scratch behind the ears, murmured her name like a goodbye he wasn't brave enough to say aloud, and left without turning back. Eliot watched from the window as Ryan walked down the street, his figure getting smaller with every step, until it disappeared entirely into the curve of the road. And then Eliot looked down at Rosie, sitting expectantly by the door, tail wagging gently. She hadn't understood the weight of the exchange. To her, the world was simple: food, warmth, love, presence. In Eliot, he had stayed. That was enough. But even as the door shut and locked, Eliot felt something flicker in the back of his mind. Not bitterness, not vengeance, but a strange kind of irony. Ryan wanted pictures, updates. Eliot could give him that, only not in the way he expected. A small, sharp smile curled on Eliot's lips, not out of cruelty, but out of something close to poetic justice. If Ryan wanted to stay tethered to the past, Eliot would let him, but he would choose how. The idea wasn't planned. It didn't arrive like a bolt of lightning. It crept in slowly like steam rising from a cup of tea, curling around Eliot's bruised heart, telling him that maybe healing didn't have to be quiet. Maybe it could be clever. That night, he took the first photo. Rosie in the backyard, squatting decisively in the grass, expression as dignified as possible for such an undignified moment. Eliot adjusted the angle, framed it like a professional, and hit send. A simple message followed. Here's your girl. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was grief repackaged, rebranded, repurposed into something he could control. Because when love ends without warning, and explanations are too little too late, sometimes all we're left with is the power to reframe the narrative, even if it's only one absurd photo at a time. Rosie didn't know she had become a symbol, a bridge, a mirror. But Eliot knew, and somehow that mattered. Sometimes closure doesn't come with a door slam or a clean break. Sometimes it arrives in tiny, deliberate acts, quiet, ridiculous, and oddly therapeutic. And in those moments, healing doesn't feel like a mountain to climb, just one small, solid step across a room. The first time Eliot sent the photo, he waited, not for a reply, but for something, anything that would make it feel like more than just an act of petty grief. But Ryan didn't respond. No laughing emoji, no protest, no please don't, just silence. And yet, when Eliot checked the message later, he saw the read receipt glow beneath it like a quiet acknowledgement. So, he kept going. Every morning, just after sunrise, when the grass was still wet and the air still smelled like dew and regret, Eliot followed Rosie outside with his phone in hand, while she sniffed, circled, and assumed her position like clockwork. Eliot crouched to capture it. A series of photos began to take shape, not just of Rosie pooping, but of Eliot's resilience taking form in absurdity. He got creative. Angles from below, side profiles, dramatic slow-motion videos, soundtracked with classical piano. Once, he even added a soft sepia filter and captioned it, Rosie reflecting on the weight of existence. Another day, he dressed her in a little bow tie and snapped a shot mid-squat with the title, Executive Business Drop-Off. Ryan never replied, but he always saw them, and that was enough. It started as a joke, an almost juvenile coping mechanism, but Eliot began to realize he was processing grief in the only way he knew how, with sharp edges wrapped in humor. These booth heap of Rosie became a form of therapy, his way of reshaping a narrative that had once broken him, where once he lay awake in a bed still carrying the imprint of someone who left too easily. He now smiled, however faintly, before drifting off. The images began piling up, hundreds of them, different lighting, weather, backgrounds. Rosie became unaware muse and companion to an entire season of release. It was ridiculous. It was petty. And it was healing. Behind the curtain of laughter, however, was something softer. Each time Eliot scrolled back through the album of Rosie's morning routine, he was forced to acknowledge what wasn't there, Ryan. The dinners cooked for two, the shared playlists, the scent that lingered on pillows longer than it should have, gone. And each photo sent was a brick in the wall Eliot was building between himself and that pain. He never spoke about the photos to his friends, never posted them publicly. This was a private performance, audience of one. And though Ryan never responded, the quiet red receipts were enough to suggest he hadn't blocked the channel. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps Rosie, squatting in the garden, was the only thread Ryan could still stomach touching. One afternoon, Eliot nearly skipped a day. He'd overslept after a night out with friends, a rarity these days, and for a moment, considered letting the routine break. But Rosie trotted to the back door with her usual urgency, tail wagging, and Eliot found himself reaching for his phone once more. Snap. Send. Day 42, still going strong. He sat on the porch afterward, coffee in hand, sunlight warming his legs. The absurdity of it all washed over him, and for the first time, he laughed out loud, genuine and full-bodied. It wasn't about Ryan anymore. Not really. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that used to shrink in the face of betrayal, about turning the mundane into a ritual of control, of choosing laughter over longing. Sometimes, the road out of heartbreak isn't noble, it isn't graceful, it's awkward, weird, and surprisingly full of dog poop. But healing doesn't demand elegance, it only asks that we show up, that we keep moving, even when it's one ridiculous photo at a time. And maybe, just maybe, in the process of documenting the things that stink, we start noticing the quiet beauty of everything else that doesn't. The chill of early autumn settled in slowly, the kind that makes the air smell cleaner and the mornings feel like a soft reset. Eliot stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in one hand, phone in the other. Rosie's latest morning update sat cute in his message draft, but something about it this time made him pause. Not out of guilt, not regret, just fatigue. The kind that comes when a ritual starts to lose its weight. He didn't send it. Instead, he slipped the phone into his hoodie pocket, gave Rosie a rub behind the ears, and stepped outside, not just into the backyard this time, but beyond the picket fences of his grief. That Saturday, Eliot went to a local LGBT community gathering for the first time in years. He didn't wear anything flashy, didn't try to impress or perform. He just showed up, quietly, like someone trying to remember what it felt like to belong without explaining himself. And it surprised him how natural it was to laugh again, to talk to strangers without the invisible heaviness pressing against his ribs, to not flinch when someone asked, "Are you seeing anyone?" and be okay simply answering, "No, Thumb." The following week, he met up with old friends for drinks. Then he signed up for a life drawing class. Then a local LGBT hiking group on Sundays. The more he stepped into these moments, the more his world expanded beyond the corners of his apartment, beyond the bitterness he'd nursed like a companion. Bit by bit, his days stopped revolving around reminders of Ryan. They became filled with new textures, new people, new air. Rosie, ever faithful, remained his shadow. She trotted beside him on trails, curled against him on the couch, and still performed her daily business like clockwork. But now, Eliot no longer felt the need to document it. Her companionship had evolved from symbol to source, not a medium for retaliation, but a presence of stability, family. One evening, as Eliot sat curled on the couch with Rosie tucked into the curve of his side, he scrolled through the old message thread. So many photos, so many moments frozen not for memory, but for a twisted sense of closure. He hovered over the delete button for a second, but stopped. Not out of nostalgia, but because they were a part of the path. The version of him who sent those photos had needed to. The version of him now no longer did. He powered the phone off. The sun was setting, casting warm gold through the windows, bathing the room in a glow that made everything feel soft, even the hard parts of the past. Eliot closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Healing hadn't come as a sudden revelation. There was no dramatic movie moment, just a slow, stubborn rebuilding. A series of tiny choices. Go outside. Say yes. Let someone make you laugh. Let Rosie make you laugh. Breathe deeper. Let go when it no longer serves you. He had thought revenge might bring him peace, but it had only dulled the ache. It was movement that softened it, connection that replaced it, choosing to live again and again, even when the bruises still echoed under the skin. Some people believe closure comes from confrontation, from final words, apologies, or perfectly tied endings. But Eliot had learned something quieter, something deeper. Closure often comes not when the other person changes, but when you no longer need them to. And in that freedom, something like peace can finally begin. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet where time seemed to slow down just enough for you to notice the rhythm of your own breath. Eliot had just returned from a walk with Rosie, her tail still wagging from chasing leaves in the wind, when he saw the email notification on his phone. The sender made his chest tighten. Ryan Whitmore. He hadn't heard from him in weeks. The photo updates had stopped. The silence had grown deeper. Eliot almost deleted the email without opening it. He wasn't sure what part of himself it might awaken again. But something told him to read. And so, with a steady breath, he tapped it open. The message wasn't long, no manipulation, no romance, just words raw, stripped of any performance. I don't expect a reply, but I need to say this somewhere. My dad found out about us, about you. He's always been conservative, controlling. I never told you how bad it really was. When he found our old messages, he lost it, said I had to fix it, clean up the image, said no son of his would be in love with a man and still have a place in his house or in his will. That's when I met her, the girl. She wasn't the plan. She was the solution, a way out, a cover. But I was stupid and weak. I thought I could walk away from you and still be whole, but I was wrong. Every day since, I've missed you. Rosie too. I don't know if I'll ever be free from him. But I just needed you to know, you were never the problem. You were the only good thing. Eliot stared at the screen, heart pounding, lips parted in disbelief. He read it again, slower this time. Each line unspooled a thread of something long buried: confusion, anger, sadness, but most of all, understanding. It didn't excuse the betrayal, but it reframed it. Ryan hadn't chosen a younger girl over Eliot. He had chosen survival over truth. And somehow, that hurt more. Eliot stood by the window, watching Rosie roll in the grass, her legs kicking at nothing, her joy untouched by human sorrow. He smiled softly, then reached for his phone, not to reply in words, but to send one final image. He took a picture: Rosie curled in his arms on the couch, sleeping soundly, her body pressed into his like she belonged nowhere else. In the photo, Eliot's face was barely visible, just the edge of his jaw, the comfort of home radiating through the frame. He attached the image, typed just one line: "We're okay, I hope you find your freedom too." Then, Mom, he pressed send. There was no need for more. He didn't expect a reply. And he didn't need one. Some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. Some stories don't end with reunion, but with release. Eliot didn't carry resentment anymore. He carried clarity, the kind that comes not from fighting back, but from choosing peace over punishment. He had found joy again, not because the pain disappeared, but because it stopped defining him. Rosie stirred in his lap and looked up, her eyes soft and trusting. Eliot whispered, "We're okay," more to himself than to her. And this time, he truly meant it. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't a gift to the person who hurt you. It's the door you walk through when you're finally ready to stop waiting for them to understand. What about you? Have you ever chosen peace over revenge? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Follow Heart Stories for more stories that remind us the power to heal has always been ours.